Ladies and gentlemen, is your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. I have been in the United States. I actually just got back to England before I fly back home to Australia. And today I thought we'd do something fun. Last week, or the week before, I forget exactly when, but we looked at some wreck footage from the RMS Titanic Inc.'s dives to the Titanic from around about 2010, I believe these dives are from. There's still a lot more that we can look at. So I thought today we'd have a little look at some of the things buried down there in their wreck footage that is really, really interesting. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank RMS Titanic Inc. for providing this remarkable footage. It's really beautiful stuff. They've actually launched a new experience. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on, but thanks to RMS Titanic Inc. for hooking me up. So the last time we looked at this footage, we were looking around the bow section, we were looking at some of the more recognizable pieces of the ship, and we looked at the stern as well, where the ship broke apart. Today, what I thought we'd do is just kind of have a look at some of the stuff in between, because there's a lot of things in the debris field that kind of sometimes very difficult to work out what you're actually looking at. I often struggle a little bit staring at the screen, wondering exactly what it is that I'm looking at. It is a mess down there. This is an interesting one. This is an electric crane. Titanic was fitted with a number of cranes that were essentially designed to be able to pick up cargo and lower it into hatches that were placed at strategically convenient locations around the ship. So there were about 3 large hatches forward, one on the very bow of the ship, the forecastle deck. We actually looked at that cargo hatch and the 2 behind it in the well deck. In the first video, you can actually see they go right down into the bottom of the ship. One of those is where the famous Renault car, the town car, was loaded into on sailing from Southampton. Now, to load the majority of the heavy cargo at the forward end of the ship, Titanic was fitted with a cargo derrick. It's like essentially a really tall crane arm that sits flush with the forward mast, and this could be rigged with lines and block and tackle and all that kind of stuff. And those lines would then be rigged to the steam winches that were positioned around it, so the crew could just physically maneuver this thing around and load up cargo and winch it up and drop it onto the well deck if need be. And then the cargo cranes were these electric cranes that were designed to then supplement this boom. So there were 2 in the forward well deck, and their entire job was essentially to pick up pieces of luggage and things like that were held in bags or on essentially the equivalent of pallets, and then lower these into the cargo hatches. So it's a pretty efficient way of loading the ship, where you've got your derrick picking up all the heavy stuff and dropping it on the deck over and over again over the side, and then the electric cranes lowering it down. Titanic also had a few more aft, so she had 2 on A deck, 2 on B deck in her well deck, and then 2 at the very stern of the ship on the poop deck, which everybody seems to laugh at every time I say that. This is one of the cranes from the after end of the ship. So obviously the stern section went through some pretty horrendous violence when it broke apart. And so most of the cranes at the stern of the ship were just ripped off and deposited all over the wreck debris field. The way we know this is because the ones at the forward end in the forward well deck are still there. So I don't exactly know where this one is from. There is one still attached to the stern section. It's one of the A deck cranes. This could well be one of the poop deck cranes, but you can see that the crane's arm itself has been twisted around there. Down on the bottom left, you can see that it's just kind of been bent right around, and it's just really interesting seeing that the forces required to bend that cargo crane's arm around, because it was designed to load a significant amount of cargo. Very interesting seeing that kind of damage and destruction on the wreck like this. That's another good view of another crane. You can see it's that one seems to be a lot more intact. That one, you can actually see the motor below it, what seems to be a significant portion of the motor that would have then been housed in a cylindrical housing. You can see it in photographs that there was a fairing over it to hide the machinery. But this was pretty cutting edge stuff back in the day. These were all electric cranes, and that was fairly impressive to have that kind of stuff on ships back then, because everything was steam powered for the most part. And for a very long time, all kinds of cranes were steam powered. This is the debris field, and there's just a lot of stuff. That looks like a bathtub down there. It's a mess. It's a hot mess. Sometimes very difficult to figure out what it is you're looking at. This is an engine cylinder still attached to its crankshaft. We actually looked at that in the first video, but it's pretty remarkable to see that the kind of force required to bend the rod around like that. That one would have sat perfectly upright. Pile of davits on the ocean floor. We talked about the davits in the first episode of this. The forward end of the bow, so you can see all the bollards, all the pieces of equipment used for mooring the ship. In a minute, we're going to see some of the superstructure. And this gives us a real glimpse into how Titanic is being slowly eaten away, essentially. So we know that there are bacteria actually eating the steel of Titanic. It was actually discovered and named after the ship itself. So the Rusticles that you can see forming, they look like the kind of like formations you see on the roof of a cave. These are called Rusticles, and it's basically deposits of the steel as it's being essentially eaten away. It's like remnants of the steel just hanging from the roof, hanging from deck heads and things like that. But it's just interesting to me that this kind of view is remarkable because you get to see how much of Titanic is being eaten away. So you can see above it how the very thin superstructure plating has been kind of eaten between these frames. This is not structural steel, so this is in the superstructure of Titanic. Titanic's hull up to B deck was the main structural part of the ship. The hull was everything, and then the superstructure on top of it, from B deck up to A deck and the boat deck, was more like a kind of like a layer cake that you put on top with like nice little, accommodations and public rooms and things like that. But the hull was doing most of the work. So the hull is made out of very, very thick steel. The superstructure is not. The superstructure is very thin. And so you can see that it's being eaten away. Now, this footage was taken a little while ago, so it will be very interesting seeing the footage from the current expedition and getting a sense of how much of Titanic has been eaten away since. I think we're going to start to see a lot of this area of the ship being eaten away very, very soon. This is down forward at B deck. You can see some of these really nice rectangular passenger stateroom windows are still intact. This is something Titanic had that the Olympic didn't. It's really, really spooky seeing the light reflecting off those. You just think when the last time was that light hit them when she was on the surface. People always ask what's going to happen to the Titanic wreck, how long it's going to be around for. I don't know, but this kind of footage gives us a sense of what's going to happen to it. And we'll start to see a little bit more of this, hopefully, in a minute. But typically, wherever there is damage on the wreck, that's where the ship will be eaten away from first. Wherever the damage already is from the breakup at the surface or the sinking, that's where, over time, the corrosion and the microbial kind of attacks, if you will really intensify. So typically you start to see it around the breakup point. So Titanic is mostly being eaten away from the bow section, from the point at which she broke up forward. So there's a lot more damage further aft than there is further forward, if that makes sense. So this is the expansion joint all the way forward on the bow section. The expansion joint essentially allowed the superstructure, as I explained, it's just kind of sitting on top, if you will. It's obviously riveted and attached to the hull, but the hull's doing a lot of work. The hull's doing a lot of like bending and flexing as it's going over waves. And the superstructure on top has to kind of follow. So the superstructure would need to breathe. It would need to be able to expand and then contract as the hull itself was bending and flexing over waves. So they provided them with expansion joints like they do on bridges, so that it kind of like almost like an accordion could open up or it could close. And in big seas, it's not unusual to see on old ships like this expansion joints moving a lot. It can be a little bit disconcerting, but it does happen. And we can see that Titanic, essentially her back has been broken and that expansion joint has opened way, way up. That would never have expanded that much during her service life or her career. But these beautiful close-up shots, you really get a sense of the actual color of the wreck. In a lot of photographs and paintings and things, it looks green or blue-green, but it's not. It's a rusty ship. So cool seeing this. What a great shot. Interestingly, you can see also here that the decking has been eaten away for the most part. There's No wood planking there on the deck, save for the teak margin planking. So the outsides of the deck there would have been sort of margin planked. The exterior side would have been sort of have like a teak frame, and the inner part of the deck was mostly pine, like various types of pine, like pitch pine, yellow pine, that kind of thing. The pine's long gone, but the teak lasts a very, very long time. Teak is extremely resilient, and if you've got outdoor furniture and it's wood and it's lasted a long time, chances are it's probably teak. The Bismarck wreck has actually got some really nice teak decking still in place. All the decking's still there because it's made out of teak. It's going to be around a long time. That's a much nicer shot of the teak planking, the margin planks on the outside there, and you can also see where there would have been pine decking. You can just make out where the bolts that secured the pine decking to the deck plate are, all in a row, and they've kind of like mushroomed out as they've like corroded over time, but the planks are long gone. So this is on the roof of the boat deck. This is right on top of the ship. You can see there's just piles of what look like piping, and the expansion joints open way up that you can probably just see what looks like a sink in there. But even more interestingly, I'm pretty sure that this is original paint that's still there. You can just make out, I mean, it looks like a rust colored now, but it's still white paint. Just below that window on the right hand side, you can basically see original paint still attached. Weirdly, white paint seems to take the longest time to be fully eaten away. It's the same with the SS United States. The hull's peeling away, the funnel's peeled off, but the white paint seems to be holding on for whatever reason. This is another crane. You can actually see this one's still attached to its cylindrical base, and this could be one still on the wreck. I'm not sure if this is the one that's still attached or if that was actually on the seafloor, but that one you could actually still see the cylindrical base part below it. This is on the boat deck now, so this is back quite close to the bridge. So you can see on one side we've got it looks like a bit of a mess, but we can make sense of this. You can see there's a staircase cover, so there were 2 stairs for the use of officers just in the vicinity of the bridge on the boat deck. These had covers on them that they could then descend down to A deck and then again down to B deck. So a really convenient way for the officers to get around. So the staircase cover is still there. Just inboard of that is a bulkhead that would have been one of the officers' quarters walls, essentially, has just fallen as that has pancaked out. James Cameron and his team think that was actually from the ship's mast during the sinking. The mast seems to have snapped back and smashed this area up, including the wheelhouse and the bridge. So there's not a lot of the bridge left. And that forward end of the officers' quarters just kind of like exploded and splayed outwards like that. And then inboard of that, we seem to have a davit. So a misplaced davit has just kind of been bent around. In fact, a pair of davits have just been bent around and plopped on the boat deck like that. But yeah, this area should not look like this at all. The telemotor, this is a pretty iconic part of the wreck. We've spoken about it quite a bit on the channel, but the telemotor was essentially a device that mounted the ship's main wheel. So you can actually see the outline of what would have been the ship's wheelhouse. So this is what's called a coaming, and it's essentially a little steel margin that they install to rivet the walls, the bulkhead of a compartment or a room. And so the coaming is there, but the wheelhouse itself is gone, because the wheelhouse, like most of the navigation bridges, bulkheads and roof and things like that, were made out of wood. And that was to prevent any metal from interrupting or interfering with the compass. It was all magnetic. And so although they could correct the compass and things like that, it was still like best practice to make the vicinity, the thing around it, mostly out of wood. Make sure it's in a happy place where it's not going to be interrupted too badly. It means on the wreck of Titanic, there's not a lot of the bridge area left. And sadly, the only still remaining remnant of the navigational equipment is the telemotor. So the ship's wheel, the main wheel, would have once sat there. It would have been enclosed in the wheelhouse. And the helmsman, the guy actually steering the ship, a quartermaster, would have been stood there with the ship's wheel. And he didn't need to see where he was going, because he's just responding to orders from the officers out on the bridge who can see where they're going. So the helmsman, it's a tough job. And it was one of the jobs that had some of the shortest the shortest shifts, if you will, the shortest watches, but you're just standing there with the wheel, checking the compass, and just making sure that you're sticking true to the orders you've been given. On the night of the sinking, of course, just before striking the iceberg, the quartermaster was standing here with the ship's wheel when he was given the order, and flung the wheel hard around in an attempt to get out of the way. So the wheel was attached to this. The telemotor's job was essentially to fire a signal, a hydraulic line connected it to the ship's steering engine all the way, 800 odd feet back at the stern of the ship. And then that would engage basically a miniature triple expansion steam engine whose sole job it was to turn the rudder, which itself was like the height of a 6-story building. Oh yeah, this is the one standing davit on the ship still. The davits being the lifeboat cranes responsible for launching the ship's lifeboats. There is one left still standing upright on the ship, and it is over on the starboard side. And this is a pretty well-known piece of trivia, but I'll tell you just in case you didn't know this. Most of the davits are in the cranked out position. They're actually, essentially, these would sit upright on the ship in normal day use, and then in the event of a sinking, they could be hand cranked out, so they'd swing the lifeboat out over the side of the ship, the lifeboat would be lowered away, as they did on the night of the sinking, then the crew would then move to the next davit. So they'd leave it swung out, but right as Titanic was about to take her final plunge, the crew were struggling to lower the boats and launch some of the boats that were left at the very, very forward end of the boat deck. And so in an attempt to then lower the next set of collapsible boats, they cranked that davit back in an attempt to then rig it and then lower the next boats away. They didn't get the time, and essentially the ship sank out from underneath them, and kind of like in a poignant monument to their efforts and their heroism that night, that davit, it's still sitting pointing upright where they cranked it in an attempt to lower the next lifeboats, and sadly quite a few of them didn't make it, especially First Officer William Murdoch, who was responsible for that part of the ship. More davits, more debris. You can see those davits are in the cranked out position, but they've just broken free from their position on the deck, and they've collapsed and fallen over, just with the ravages of time, presumably. But there was a lot of damage done as Titanic was sinking from the ship's funnel shrouds and stays. These are the big, thick, heavy cables that once connected the funnels to the ship's decks, and they just kind of went crazy, whipping up and down the deck, ripping things off, and doing some bad damage after the ship sank. This is the remains of the mast, collapsed over the well deck, and so the kind of, to give you context, the perspective of what we're looking at here is the bow, the very front of the ship, is to the left, and then heading to the right, you'd be like getting towards the bridge. So that's where we're looking at. So where the camera is basically on the port side of the ship's well deck, and you can actually see where the crow's nest once was. So when they first found Titanic, the crow's nest, the lookout's position, was still attached to the wreck. It was still on the mast, even though the mast itself had obviously collapsed. You can tell the crow's nest was here because you can see there's a little hole down here on the left in the mast with some kind of like handlebars, like some railings there. So there was actually a track inside the mast. There was a ladder, and you could access the crow's nest by climbing up the inside of the mast, emerging through this little hatch, using those handrails to grab and pull yourself up and through. And you can just see where the kind of the combing is to actually attach the crow's nest below it. So that's where they would have been standing. And then above all of this, you can see this tiny little like hook-looking thing. And that was the mounting point for the ship's main bell. And that was the bell that lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee rang the night they spotted the berg. The bell has been recovered, but that's where it once would have sat. And that would have been a significant height over the forecastle deck. And you can see now the mast has snapped back, fallen down. Looks a little sad. These are those cranes I was telling you about that are still in place in the forward part of the well deck. You can see the mast is decayed straight through there. It's really falling apart. I don't think that'll be around much longer at all. Amazing. This is looking up now towards the bridge, and you can actually just see some of the hand railings are still there. This is the port side of the forecastle deck. You can see a skylight cover there for what would have been the crew galley below it. That's where the crew would have cooked their meals, for the firemen, for the trimmers, those guys. This is a funny little thing. There's a lot of things down there where there shouldn't be things. So This is in Titanic's well deck, I believe, right at the bow. And you can see a beautiful brass decorative thing that was not mounted there during the ship's day-to-day life. This is an electric heater from first class. They made use of electric heaters instead of actual fireplaces because it was more convenient. In fact, I think Titanic had one working fireplace, and it was in the first class smoking room. And it was a coal fire, not a wood fire. They supplemented these with a lot of electric heaters that were positioned in staterooms and around the grand staircase entrance and some of the public rooms and things like that. It would have been nice and toasty. But of course, when Titanic broke up, they just kind of spilled out and probably slowly floated down. The bow section of the wreck at that point probably weighed, if you consider it was like 20 to 30,000 tons of steel, and it was full of about 20,000 tons of water, at least. It just kind of sank like a rock. And the boilers and big heavy pieces of equipment, machinery like that, sank like rocks as well. But the smaller, lighter bits of equipment, like heaters and things like that, would have slowly floated down over time. And that one, by coincidence, just happens to have landed on the well deck, a place where it never would have been. And so that can be a little bit confusing sometimes. You're looking at footage or photographs of the wreck. Like, I think they found one of the ship's boilers, and sitting on top of it was a teacup or something like that. It just happened to land there. So there's a lot of weird coincidental placement of things where they shouldn't be. Looks like the railing is just like slowly melting, like it's been left in the sun too long, just slowly melting off. That would have sat perfectly straight once. And just with time, it's just amazing what salt water does to steel. You can see though, in this shot here, the hull is in really, really nice condition. I mean, this is a lot further forward by the looks of it on the bow, but it almost also looks like the original paint is still there. It's still black. It will take a long time. Titanic will eventually be eaten basically down to her frames, and she will kind of look like the Mahino wreck eventually, where there's just basically the rib cage, but it's going to take a long time by the looks of it. This is one of the ship's main anchors. Again, it kind of blows my mind that they're just still sitting exactly where they were sitting the night the ship struck the berg. They are held in place really, really well by the machinery that was designed to hold it in place back in 1912, and is still doing its job. Again, one of those things that one of these days they will eventually be let go and fall to the seafloor. But for now, they're still in place. So we're still at the bow section. We're back at the superstructure area, and we're getting some nice views of some pretty famous spaces here. So there's the captain's quarters are essentially exposed now because the damage from the mast or the funnel, the collapse of the first funnel, essentially collapsed a big section of the forward officers' quarters deck house there. And with time, a lot of the very thin plating has been eaten away. If you want to see how thin any of that plating is, go and stay on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, and you realize you hear everything. You can hear everything that's going on next door. If people are walking past, you can hear it. It's remarkable. It's all very thin. So that's just been eaten away. Remember what I said, where there's damage, there will be more eating away of steel. But it's done something weird, where here, it's actually just kind of exposed this bathtub. And you can see the fittings, all the brass fittings are still there. This is, I believe, Captain Smith's bathtub from the captain's quarters. It, I think, has since been covered in more debris because this part of the ship has collapsed more. But you can definitely see where it's being eaten away. This is a really cool shot. This is... I was talking about the ship being eaten away where there's damage. This is where the officers' quarters kind of ended, and the first class accommodations essentially began. So this is heading towards the grand staircase entrance on the boat deck, and you can see that the deck house is basically collapsed and been eaten away, and it's looking very, very sad. So we're now looking aft. We're looking down the ship's starboard side, the right-hand side. We're looking towards the breakup point. In the foreground, you can see an electric winch. Now, this is in very, very good condition. This electric winch was used to basically lower or raise lifeboats. On the night of the sinking, they didn't use these. They were mainly used to raise them, actually, because the lifeboats weighed tons themselves. They would essentially rig the line to the davit to this winch and use that to then pull the lifeboat up and out of the water, save the crew some hard backbreaking labor. But on the night of the sinking, obviously, they didn't have cause to use them. Behind this, you can see like a little curved U-shaped pipe, or a pair of pipes. Now, these were pneumatic tubes, and they are still shiny, which is remarkable. Brass pneumatic tubes. And they ran all the way to the Marconi room, the wireless room, from the purser's office. And the idea was that passengers in first class could send telegrams, Marconigrams, to shore. And they would essentially go to the purser's office, pay the cost of the Marconigram, and then the message would be put into a pneumatic tube and then fired up through these tubes all the way forward into the Marconi room. Very cool technology. And the tubes are still standing, even though the deck house around them has been reduced to carnage. It really doesn't look very good down there. It's a bit sad, but the tubes are still there. This is what I was talking about. This is on A deck. And this is where the ship is the most damaged. This is very close to where the breakup happened. And you can see that what was once the screen on A deck that the White Star installed at the last minute on Titanic to provide some enclosed space for passengers to walk in first class. The screens have been eaten away, and essentially all you've got now are the frames that would have once been in between the screen's windows. The deck house above on the boat deck has been eaten away as well. You can see there's really kind of nothing up there. It's all collapsed. She's not in good shape. And that's where Titanic, the superstructure, is being eaten away from the most and collapsing as time takes place, as time does its thing. You know, the Titanic's superstructure will essentially collapse eventually. And, you know, like I said, you want to see what Titanic will look like, check out the Mahino. I think that's a pretty good analog. Well, there you have it. That was some pretty interesting stuff. I wanted to thank, again, RMS Titanic Inc. for providing that beautiful wreck footage. I said at the start of the video, they've partnered with Artifact Labs, and they have built this thing called Titanic's Digital Journey. And it's essentially a membership program that gives you access to some digital collectibles, some behind-the-scenes stuff to do with the wreck. You can get to learn more about the artifacts. Also, at the moment, they're running a expedition to the wreck, and our friend James Penker from Titanic Honor and Glory is on board the ship. James, if you're watching this, get back to work. The motivator behind this is that not everybody can go and see the artifact exhibitions, and they're pretty amazing. And Titanic's Digital Journey essentially brings the artifact exhibition to you. So you can purchase a membership and then basically explore the artifacts and learn a lot more about them. They're dropping some pretty regular consistent updates on their expeditions that they're running as well, so you'll get access to all of that information as it's coming through. You can also attend events through their speaker series where they've got some Titanic experts and people associated with the wreck and the exploration of it coming in and doing some interesting talks, and you can attend those and learn more about the ship. So if you're interested in Titanic's Digital Journey and you enjoy this kind of stuff, please go ahead and visit them at member.discovertitanic.com. And if you use this code, Oceanliner, you will receive a discount on sign up. Again, that code, Oceanliner. Difficult to remember, I know. Well, it's always fun to sit down and look at wreck footage with you guys. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. Stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.